Well, here we go with a special guest today, Mr. Haydn Shaw, CSP. He works with organizations in an area that is really important in this day and age, and that's helping them reduce turnover. But Hayden, kick us off here. Tell us about Haydn Shaw and some of the work that you do.
Yeah, I research and write about different generations, and I end up doing a lot of keynote speeches to all kinds of industries. And then I help organizations reduce turnover, especially um, go from the revolving door to shutting the door on uh, especially those who are in their 20s, the highest turnover group that organizations have.
Yeah, so I heard something the other day that we're in the talk about the generational aspect, that we're in the most blended generation workforce that we've seen in recent times. Tell us about some of the things that, whether I'm a speaker or maybe I'm somebody who's hiring speakers or maybe I'm just a manager dealing with these dynamics. What are some of the things that I need to consider when it comes to this multi-generational world that we find ourselves in?
Well, you bet. Now, if you're a person hiring speakers, you probably had someone talk about generations throughout the years. There's, a whole score of people who do really well, and then hundreds of people, that's one of the topics they can talk about. And uh, if you're just going to do a standard generational presentation, many of you people in your audience have already heard that. What's much more important is to understand what's going on today, how you relate across the wide spectrum of generations, like you mentioned, Dean, and especially what you do to motivate them. And then how do you customize that to what the people in your group, your company, your association want to know most? And today, it's usually around retention. What do we do to hold on to people who are younger? What do we do to attract? We can't find people who are in their 20s. How do we get them to stick? And and then what do we do to motivate and communicate across the generations? And as somebody recently said, and how do we do all that without making the people who've been here 30 years feel like that they're now second class citizens because everything's about the brand new employees.
Mm. That's a big topic, and if I think about the last 100 managers that I've had conversations with, and I don't think there's one of them that isn't wrestling in some form with the finding,
Right.
the keeping, or the getting them going issues that you just hit on there. And so I would imagine that pulls you into lots of different industries and lots of different avenues. And you're steeped. I mean, your background is really in depth training, right? I mean, would you say that by by vocation, your history is really training, and you find yourself on stage as well, giving those messages. Tell us about how training and speaking has played out in your journey.
Well, certainly. So I worked with Stephen Covey for 30 years. So I just recently left that organization. Great organization, trained 30,000 managers, 200,000 people over the years. The course I wrote for Franklin Covey on generational differences had 100,000 people attend it. And so, yeah, I've done a lot of training. I'm focused now that I've left them more on keynote speaking and kind of rolling sleeves up and jumping into organizations and actually helping them reduce the numbers in their turnover. So I still do training as a part of that, and still do a lot of training. But the focus is more on keynoting and then seeing long-term results.
So, what have you found to be some lessons? Maybe there's other people that are going to be following in your footsteps, or they're trainers and they're thinking about spending more time on stage as a speaker. What are some of the principles that you found to be really important in that transition?
Well, all right. Well, this will sound like an NSA sales pitch, but I joined NSA when somebody I worked with at Franklin Covey, Joe Calhoun, said to me, "Well, if you want to do more keynoting, you need to join NSA." And I said, "Why? I do more training than I do keynoting." He said, "But if you want to do more keynoting, you need to join NSA." He said, "All the things I learned about building a successful keynoting came from NSA." And so I would agree with that. If you're interested in keynoting, the number one thing you can do is NSA. The second thing you can do is make sure you have a keynote speech that works. And you may need to find some people to help you write it, people to shape the language, people to help you with some of the things in your stage presence. Thirdly, it's like the founder of NSA, said, somebody asked him if you have to be funny as a speaker, and he said, only if you want to be paid. And so if humor is not your thing, then that would be my third bit of advice, to figure out how you can add some humor to what you're doing, because that's one of the differentiators. And find some people who will refer you as an emerging speaker. And that's a great way to get in the door. Find some people more experienced who usually say no to lower price points, who will refer you to it as an emerging speaker, and you can begin to make some progress that way. Those are four pieces of advice to help somebody brand new get started.
Now you started, and certainly we're a part of the NSA Illinois chapter,
You bet.
which is the local experience for people as a part of this NSA world, and it's the association for people that are interested in being professional speakers, and we've got a lot of trainers in it. But you've got three letters behind your name, CSP, and people that are not, maybe I hire speakers, maybe I've just been tasked with my company. They said, hey, go find some speakers.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm new to the speaking world and I've seen these letters pop up. Tell us about CSP.
Well, it means certified speaking professional, and it's a designation that you can earn through the National Speakers Association. You have to do a lot of speeches, you have to make a living at it, and then you have to submit a fairly rigorous evaluation. You have to submit a video. Other CSPs review it to see if it's something that those designations would say to a meeting planner or someone looking at speakers. Hey, this person's going to do a good job for us. This person's proven themselves, and so that's really what that certification means. About 18% of the professional speakers in the world have earned it.
So it's a kind of a stamp of approval that this person has put the reps in and they've demonstrated a level of professionalism that the National Speaker Association says they passed, right?
You bet. And you can get this if you're more of a trainer. You can get this for training days as well as keynoting days. And so, and even for facilitation days, if you facilitate smaller groups. So it's not just, keynoting on a stage in front of 1,000 people.
So let's shift gears back to some of the work that you're doing in this turnover space and in the multi-generational space, and how that's evolved as you've transitioned from being a trainer into more of a presenter, working with larger groups, associations like that. For you, what have you found to be some of the hurdles that you've had to overcome in transitioning out of what was for many years a big part of your identity or your practice, and moving into something that's a little bit more maybe opaque, a little bit new? Tell us about that journey of transition, of reinvention, even, if you will.
Well, for me, it wasn't new. I actually was a part of the speech team when I was in high school. So I ran cross country and did speech. So I did extemporaneous speaking, where you had to write a speech and then deliver it, all within the same hour and a half time frame, because I knew I wanted to speak for a living. And so early on, that's what I did. And so for me, speaking actually came before the training did. So it was in some ways an unusual story. But I think for a lot of people who move from training to speaking, there are a couple of key things that they got to sort out. One is how they're going to price themselves, because sometimes people are like, I want this keynote rate. And then somebody sees it and says, well, that's a 90-minute keynote's more expensive than your training rate, because often there are different price levels that people are willing to pay for those things. So I think one of the first hurdles is sorting out how you're going to price yourself. And then secondly, there's a different set of large group versus small group skills. And so you can have a very interactive keynote, but that's different than facilitating a training session. And so some people just find themselves not enjoying the level of energy that's needed. And there's a timing that has to happen when you're when you're doing it. I remember a colleague at Franklin Covey saying to me when he saw me do a presentation to 100 people, he said, "You're particularly good at waiting for the audience to interact," because he said, the laughter has to go from the front of the room to the back of the room and come back again, and you're particularly good at not rushing that. And not all people who do training know the large group dynamics, and that's where getting some help from a coach or joining NSA can be particularly helpful with that. I also want to add two things. We've talked about the generational side. I do two other contents in speeches. I do a lot of speeches around change management, the 6 change reactions, kind of a hands-on after working with 30,000 managers and 1,500 companies. How do you actually get change to stick? And so that's another keynote and training. And then lastly, I've done a lot lately with leading hybrid teams. It's kind of rolls out of the generational research. But the generations respond to hybrid and remote work a little differently. The boomers hated it at first, and now they're like, "I'm never wearing pants again." So that was the irony, is how much the boomers didn't want to work from home, and now how much they don't want to go back. So there's just some generational distinctives, and the research is pretty clear on what it takes to be especially effective in the hybrid world.
Well, yeah, we could have a whole episode just exploring those issues because they're real and they seem like they're always in flux right now for companies trying to figure out the in office and the at home and how do we balance our
Right.
objectives of effective teams along with the individual needs so that we can attract and retain and engage talent.
And the conversation, I know we don't want to sidetrack it, but the conversation's got a little tense today. You've got people going, "I'm not going back." Okay, well, to your point around communication and collaboration, what are your executives worried about? And if you don't address the things they're worried about, you're going back. And on the other hand, why do people think it works? Where is the gap? 80% of employees want to have the option, and 80% of executives want them back in the office. We have got a massive disconnect. And right now, nobody's listening to anybody else and trying to figure out what to do to mitigate what both sides see as real challenges.
Yeah, I saw a note from an executive of a very large company just a couple of days ago that said something to the effect of if employees aren't in the office at least 3 days a week, it's probably not going to work out very well for them.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that breakdown in
I saw
communication,
that Amazon executive as well.
that breakdown in communication really is important for us as individuals. It's an opportunity for us as speaking professionals and trainers to help elevate the type of conversations our clients are having so that it isn't just these factions, but let's focus on, what's the problem we're trying to solve here together? What is it we really want? And that's certainly important work that you're doing with your clients. Um, this let's touch on, let's kind of maybe wrap things up here, going back to the power that speaking and training can have together. An experience that I've had is my my stage time, my public speaking has made me a better trainer, and my training experience has made me more engaging as a presenter. What are some of your perspectives for somebody in your view and your experience if they're coming from one of those directions versus the other? Some advice that you'd have for them, or tips since you've spent so much time in both worlds.
Well, I think they can help with pieces. For example, sometimes trainers who are highly facilitative can bore people with ADHD. Matter of fact, I remember somebody years ago saying, "What do we do when people are on their phones?" And people gave all kinds of ideas to her, and I just wrote her back and said, "Be more interesting." To which she called me and she phoned me and then called me names because we were good friends. But the point of it is, sometimes we need to have a little more juice in the facilitation realm, and the keynoting experience can help us add some more juice to that. And some keynoters are amazing for 90 minutes. They just don't have enough interaction for people to process what they say. And you know what the brain science shows? We need about every 20 minutes, we need a moment to unload our brain, or the tape fills up like those old answering machines with those continuous loop tapes where it just starts re-recording over the. So they're missing out on the first part of your keynote. If you're amazing, You hold them in the palm of your hand. But if you don't have the ability to create some moments for interaction and even some, the world's just changed. And the younger the audience, the more they expect interaction to be a part of even their keynote experience. So some of those facilitation things are bleeding over. So I'd say if you don't have humor and interaction, it's hard to make a living as a professional speaker today, as the audiences change.
Yeah, point well taken. And I've observed really powerful, let's say, after lunch keynote speakers, 30-minute, amazing message, and then the association asked them to do a breakout, as they often do afterwards, and I went and
Yeah.
sat in the breakout to observe. I'm always looking to learn, and then I see the tide go out and they're naked, and it's a foreign world for them to deal with the interactions necessary for that world. So each of us have an opportunity to kind of maybe learn some lessons from each of these worlds. And if I'm hiring somebody, if I'm a meeting organizer, uh, it's good for me to know what type of an experience am I really wanting to have for my audience, because it's across that spectrum about how interactive, how inspirational, what's the vibe that I want to be able to bring in to this event. Hayden, is there anything that I didn't ask that you'd like to share as we wind down here together?
Uh, Thanks, Dean, for doing these interviews and for creating value for people who are either looking at speakers or looking about being a speaker. So I don't have anything to add other than a thank you for doing this.
If people want to get connected with you or follow your work, where would you direct them?
Peopledrivenresults.com, or you can find my LinkedIn profile at Haydn, Haydn, no E, Haydn Shaw.
Great. Hayden, thanks for being with us today. Have a great year.